The morning sun filtered through the blinds of a small New York apartment, casting thin stripes of light across the hardwood floor. It was a quiet Saturday, the kind where the city seemed to take a collective breath before the chaos of the week resumed. In the living room, a television hummed softly, tuned to a news channel that had been buzzing for weeks with a story that no one could quite believe. The anchor's voice was steady, practiced, as she delivered the latest update. In a stunning turn of events, WHOOPI Goldberg has been sentenced to 2 years in prison following a legal battle with billionaire Elon Musk. The case, which has gripped the nation, stems from comments made on the View that Musk's legal team argued crossed the line into defamation. Today, we'll unpack the details of this unprecedented ruling. Across town, in a cozy coffee shop nestled between towering skyscrapers, Sarah sipped her latte and scrolled through her phone. She'd been following the story since it first broke months ago, not because she was particularly invested in celebrity drama, but because it felt like something bigger was at play. The headlines had started small, whispers of a lawsuit, a few pointed remarks on air, but they'd snowballed into a full-blown courtroom saga that had everyone talking. She pulled up a news article, the text glowing on her screen, and began to read. It was all there. The initial spark, the escalation, and now, the sentencing. 2 years. She shook her head, setting her cup down. How had it come to this? It all began on a crisp October afternoon the previous year. The set of The View was as lively as ever, the hosts seated around their familiar table, their voices overlapping in a symphony of opinions. WHOOPI Goldberg, the show's veteran moderator, leaned forward in her chair, her expression a mix of exasperation and amusement. The topic of the day was Elon Musk's latest venture, a controversial move to offer cash incentives to voters who signed a petition supporting his political views. "This man thinks he can buy an election," WHOOPI had said, her tone sharp but not entirely serious. "He's out here throwing money around like it's Monopoly, and we're all just supposed to play along?" The audience laughed, the co-hosts chimed in, and the segment moved on. It was the kind of offhand comment that The View was known for. Provocative, yes, but hardly groundbreaking. Except this time, it didn't end there. Elon Musk, never one to shy away from a fight, caught wind of the remark. He was in his office in Austin, surrounded by screens and prototypes, when an assistant flagged the clip. He watched it once, then again, his jaw tightening with each replay. To him, it wasn't just a quip, it was an attack on his character, a suggestion that his actions were not only unethical but illegal. He'd spent years building an empire, weathering criticism and lawsuits alike, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the casual dismissal in WHOOPI's voice, or the way the audience's laughter seemed to echo beyond the studio walls. Whatever it was, Musk decided he wasn't going to let it slide. Within days, his legal team filed a defamation suit against WHOOPI Goldberg and ABC, the network that aired The View. The complaint was detailed, citing her exact words and arguing that they implied Musk was engaging in criminal behavior, vote buying, to be precise, which carried serious legal and reputational consequences. The damages sought were staggering. $100 million, a figure that raised eyebrows even among those accustomed to Musk's bold moves. The filing made headlines immediately, with pundits on every channel debating whether it was a legitimate grievance or an overreaction from a man known for his thin skin. Social media erupted, too, with hashtags like #WHOOPI vs. Elon and #Musk lawsuit trending for weeks. Sarah remembered those early days vividly. She'd been at a friend's apartment when the news broke, the two of them sprawled on a couch with a bowl of popcorn between them. "He can't be serious," her friend had said, laughing as she scrolled through X. "It's WHOOPI Goldberg. She says stuff like that all the time." Sarah had nodded, But something nagged at her. Musk wasn't like other public figures. He had a history of taking legal action, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, and he didn't seem to care about the optics. This wasn't just a celebrity spat. It was a collision of two larger-than-life personalities, each with their own loyal followings and unyielding principles. The case moved quickly through the courts, faster than most expected. By early spring, depositions were underway, and the public got its first glimpse of the arguments on both sides. Musk's team leaned heavily on the idea of actual malice, a legal standard in defamation cases involving public figures. They claimed Whoopi knew her statement was false, or at least acted with reckless disregard for the truth, and that it had caused measurable harm to Musk's reputation and businesses. They pointed to a dip in Tesla's stock price in the days following the broadcast, as well as a flurry of negative press that they argued could be traced back to her words. Whoopi's defense, meanwhile, was rooted in free speech. Her lawyers argued that the comment was an opinion, not a statement of fact, and that it fell well within the bounds of protected commentary. Ms. Goldberg is a comedian and a talk show host, one of her attorneys said in a press conference outside the courthouse. Her job is to provoke thought, to challenge power, and yes, sometimes to make people laugh. If we start jailing people for that, we've got bigger problems than a billionaire's hurt feelings. The argument resonated with many, especially those who saw the lawsuit as an attempt to silence dissent. Protests popped up outside ABC's headquarters, with signs reading, "Free Whoopi" and "Hands off our voices." Sarah had watched those protests on TV, the crowds growing larger as the trial date approached. She'd always admired Whoopi, not just for her humor, but for her willingness to speak her mind, even when it got her in trouble. Growing up, Sarah had seen her in movies like Ghost and Sister Act, and later on The View, where she tackled everything from politics to personal anecdotes with the same unflinching honesty. To Sarah, Whoopi represented a kind of fearlessness that felt rare in a world obsessed with perfection and PR. The idea of her facing prison over a single comment was unsettling, like a crack in the foundation of something she'd taken for granted. The trial itself was a spectacle. Held in a federal courthouse in Manhattan, it drew reporters, fans, and curious onlookers from across the country. Inside, the courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Musk took the stand first, dressed in a sleek black suit, his demeanor calm but resolute. He spoke about his work, his vision for the future, and the toll that public scrutiny had taken on him over the years. "I don't mind criticism," he said, his voice steady. "But when someone accuses me of breaking the law, of undermining democracy, that's not a joke. That's a line you don't cross." His lawyers followed with charts and data, painting a picture of a man wronged by a careless remark. Whoopi's testimony was different. Less polished, more human. She wore her signature glasses and a bright scarf, her hands gesturing as she spoke. "I've been talking for a living for decades," she told the jury. "I say what I think, and sometimes it ruffles feathers. But I never meant to hurt anyone, and I sure as hell didn't mean to lie." She paused, looking directly at Musk, who sat stone-faced across the room. "If I thought for a second that what I said would land me here, I'd have picked my words more carefully. But I didn't, and I stand by that." Her candor won her some nods from the jury, but it was clear the case wasn't just about intent, it was about consequences. Weeks of testimony followed, with experts dissecting everything from the legal definition of defamation to the cultural role of talk shows. The prosecution brought in a linguistics professor who argued that Whoopi's phrasing, "buying an election," carried a specific, accusatory weight. The defense countered with a media analyst who insisted that such hyperbole was standard fare in daytime TV, hardly grounds for a prison sentence. Outside, the public debate raged on. Some saw Musk as a bully, using his wealth to punish a critic. Others viewed Whoopi as reckless, a symbol of a media culture that too often hid behind free speech to avoid accountability. Sarah followed it all from her phone, reading updates between shifts at her job in a bookstore. She'd started discussing it with customers, too. Older ones who remembered Whoopi's comedy specials, younger ones who knew Musk from his SpaceX launches. Opinions were split, but the one thing everyone agreed on was that the outcome would matter. If Musk won, it could set a precedent for how public figures handled criticism. If Whoopi prevailed, it might embolden others to speak out without fear. Either way, the stakes felt higher than a single courtroom. The verdict came on a rainy afternoon in late March. The jury deliberated for 3 days, an eternity by trial standards, before filing back into the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman with gray hair pulled into a tight bun, read the decision aloud. On the charge of defamation, we find the defendant, Whoopi Goldberg, guilty. A murmur rippled through the room. The sentencing phase followed quickly, with the prosecution pushing for a harsh penalty to send a message. Whoopi's team pleaded for leniency, citing her decades of public service and the lack of prior legal trouble. In the end, the judge settled on 2 years, a compromise that satisfied no one. Sarah was at home when the news broke, her TV flashing with live coverage. She watched as Whoopi emerged from the courthouse, flanked by her lawyers, her face a mask of disbelief. Reporters shouted questions, cameras clicked, but she said nothing, climbing into a waiting car that sped off into the drizzle. Musk, meanwhile, issued a brief statement through his team. Justice has been served. This was never about silencing anyone. It was about truth. The words felt hollow to Sarah, who couldn't shake the image of Whoopi's expression. 2 years wasn't a life sentence, but for a woman in her late 60s, it was a heavy blow. The aftermath was chaotic. The View went on hiatus, its future uncertain without its anchor. ABC faced backlash, with some calling for a boycott while others demanded the network stand by Whoopi. Online, the discourse was relentless. Memes, think pieces, and heated threads dissecting every angle. Sarah found herself drawn into it, too, joining conversations with friends and strangers alike. "It's not about the money," she argued one night over drinks. Musk didn't need $100 million. He wanted to win, to prove a point. And now Whoopi's paying for it. Her friend shrugged. She knew who she was dealing with. You poke the bear, you get the claws. As spring turned to summer, the story began to fade from the headlines, replaced by newer scandals and crises. Whoopi started her sentence in a minimum security facility upstate, her days now governed by routine rather than a studio schedule. Reports trickled out, letters from her to fans, updates from her co-hosts, but she kept a low profile, letting the world move on without her voice. Musk, meanwhile, returned to his empire, his victory a footnote in a life already full of headlines. Tesla's stock rebounded, SpaceX launched another rocket, and the petition controversy became old news. Sarah thought about it less as the months passed, but it never fully left her. She'd see Whoopi's movies on late-night TV and feel a pang of something. Nostalgia, maybe, or frustration. She'd scroll past Musk's latest tweets and wonder if he ever thought about the trial, about the woman whose life he'd altered. 2 years wasn't forever, but it was long enough to change things. Whoopi would be back eventually, her humor intact, her spirit maybe a little bruised but unbroken. And Musk would keep pushing forward, untouchable in his orbit. One evening in early April, Sarah sat by her window, the city lights twinkling below. The news was on again, A recap of the year's biggest stories. The anchor mentioned Whoopi's sentencing in passing, a brief nod to a saga that had once dominated the airwaves. Sarah turned the volume down, letting the silence settle. She didn't need to hear it all again. She'd lived it, in her own small way, alongside millions of others. It was a story of words and power, of consequences and convictions, and it had left its mark. Not just on Whoopi or Musk, but on everyone who'd watched it unfold, wondering where the line was drawn and who got to decide. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the cool glass of the window pressing against her shoulder as she stared out at the city. The muted television flickered in the corner of her eye, the anchor's voice reduced to a faint hum. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. It was the same recap she'd seen a dozen times, the same clips of Whoopi leaving the courthouse, the same soundbites from Musk's team. It felt like a loop, a story that refused to let go even as the world tried to move on. Outside, a taxi honked, its sound muffled by the height of her apartment. She traced the path of its yellow blur with her eyes, wondering idly where it was headed. The city was alive, pulsing with its usual rhythm, and yet here she was, stuck on a moment that wouldn't budge. 2 years. The number rattled around in her head, heavy and unyielding. She pictured Whoopi in that upstate facility, maybe sitting in a common room or writing one of those letters the tabloids kept speculating about. Did she miss the chaos of The View? Did she regret that day on set? Sarah shifted, pulling her knees up to her chest. She'd never met Whoopi, never even been to a taping of the show, but there was something personal about it all. Maybe it was because she'd grown up with her voice, those movies, those monologues, or maybe it was the principle of it. A woman had spoken her mind, and now she was behind bars. It didn't sit right, no matter how many times she turned it over in her thoughts. She glanced at the TV again, catching a glimpse of Musk's face, that familiar half-smirk. He'd won, and life had gone on for him. That was the part that stung the most. The coffee she'd made earlier sat cold on the table beside her, a thin film forming on its surface. She reached for it anyway, taking a sip and grimacing at the taste. It was a habit, keeping herself busy with small things when her mind got too loud. She set the mug back down and picked up her phone instead, scrolling through X for the latest takes. There were still people posting about it, some defending Whoopi, others gloating over Musk's victory. One user had written, "She should have known better than to mess with a guy like him." Sarah frowned, her thumb hovering over the reply button. She wanted to argue, to say it wasn't about knowing better, it was about having the right to speak. But she didn't type anything. What was the point? The city lights blurred as her eyes unfocused, her thoughts drifting back to the trial. She could still picture the courtroom sketches that had flooded the news. Whoopi with her head held high, Musk with that unreadable expression. The jury had been ordinary people, just like her, tasked with deciding something extraordinary. She wondered what they'd felt when they handed down that verdict. Relief? Doubt? Pride? 2 years wasn't a slap on the wrist, but it wasn't the maximum either. It was a middle ground, a compromise that left everyone unsatisfied. Maybe that was the real punishment, nobody walking away whole. A breeze slipped through the cracked window, brushing against her cheek. She hadn't realized how warm the room had gotten, the radiator humming quietly in the background. She stood to open the window wider, letting the April air flood in. It smelled faintly of rain and exhaust, the signature scent of New York in spring. She leaned against the frame, her arms crossed, and watched a group of people cross the street below. They were laughing, their voices carrying faintly upward. Life went on, she thought. For them, for Musk, For everyone but Whoopi. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her back. It was a text from her friend Mia. "You still obsessing over that trial?" Sarah smiled faintly, typing back, "Maybe a little." Mia's reply came fast. "Let it go, girl. She'll be fine. 2 years isn't forever." Sarah set the phone down without responding. Mia was right, of course. 2 years would pass, and Whoopi would be back. But it wasn't just about the time. It was about what it meant, what it said about the world they lived in. She couldn't shake that. The TV flickered again, the news segment ending with a transition to weather. Sarah didn't move to turn it off. She liked the background noise, the illusion of company. She walked to the kitchen instead, rinsing her mug in the sink and watching the water swirl down the drain. Her apartment was small, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and peeling paint, but it was hers. She'd moved here after college, chasing a dream of writing that had since settled into a steady job at the bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. She wondered if Whoopi had ever had moments like this, quiet, ordinary ones, before fame took over. Back at the window, she rested her forehead against the glass, the coolness soothing her skin. She thought about Musk again, about his statement after the verdict. "Justice has been served." The words echoed in her mind, polished and precise. She didn't buy it. Justice didn't feel like this, like a woman locked away while a billionaire moved on unscathed. She knew Musk had his fans, people who saw him as a genius pushing humanity forward. She got that, in a way. But this? This felt petty, personal. A power play dressed up as principle. The street below grew quieter, the evening settling in. Sarah's reflection stared back at her in the window, faint against the darkening sky. She looked tired, her hair messy from running her hands through it. She hadn't planned to spend her night dwelling on this, but here she was. It was the unfairness of it, she decided. That's what kept her hooked. Whoopi wasn't perfect, nobody was, but 2 years for a comment. It didn't add up. She sighed, her breath fogging the glass for a moment before fading. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Mia, "Come out with us. You need a drink." Sarah hesitated, then typed, "Maybe tomorrow." She wasn't in the mood for noise or crowds. Not tonight. She wanted to sit with this a little longer, to figure out why it mattered so much. She turned back to the TV, the weather forecast now replaced by a commercial. She muted it completely, the silence wrapping around her like a blanket. It was just her and her thoughts now, the city a distant hum. She crossed to the couch and sank into it, pulling a throw over her legs. The fabric was soft, worn from years of use. She closed her eyes, picturing Whoopi on that set again, the moment it all started. "He thinks he can buy an election." It had been a throwaway line, a jab in a sea of jabs. Sarah wondered if Whoopi had known, even for a second, that it would lead here. Probably not. That was the thing about words. They could be so small until they weren't. The radiator clicked, a steady rhythm in the quiet. Sarah opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the protests, the free Whoopi signs, the voices that had rallied behind her. They'd faded now, drowned out by time and apathy. She wished she'd gone to one, held a sign, done something. It wouldn't have changed the verdict, but it might have felt like fighting back. She wasn't usually one for causes. She voted, she recycled, she tried to be decent, but this had hit a nerve. Her gaze drifted to a bookshelf across the room, stacked with novels and old journals. She'd always loved stories, the way they could pull you in and make you feel. This one, though, wasn't in a book. It was real, messy, unresolved. She wondered if Whoopi was writing about it now, scribbling thoughts in a notebook between prison meals. She hoped so. There was a story there, one worth telling. Maybe when she got out, she'd turn it into something. A memoir, a comedy special, a middle finger to the whole ordeal. The thought made Sarah smile. Just a little. She could see it. Whoopi on stage, glasses glinting under the lights, saying, "2 years for a joke? Honey, I've heard worse from my exes." The crowd would roar, and it'd be like nothing had changed. That was the Whoopi Sarah knew, the one she'd grown up with. Resilient. Unapologetic. She'd survive this, wouldn't she? 2 years was a chapter, not the whole book. A siren wailed in the distance, sharp and fleeting. Sarah pulled the throw tighter around her, the fabric bunching under her chin. She didn't want to let it go, not yet. It wasn't just about Whoopi or Musk, it was about the bigger picture, the one she couldn't quite name. Power, maybe. Or truth. Or the way the world bent toward those who could afford to bend it. She didn't have answers, just questions that kept circling back. The TV screen went dark, its timer kicking in. Sarah didn't bother turning it back on. She sat there, the room dimming as night took hold, and let her mind wander. She thought about the jury again, those 12 strangers who'd held Whoopi's fate. What had they seen that she hadn't? Had they believed Musk, his charts and his calm certainty? Or had they just wanted it over, a clean cut to a tangled mess? She'd never know, and that was part of it, the not knowing, the guessing, the endless what-ifs. Her phone stayed silent now, Mia giving up for the night. Sarah was glad for it. She needed this space, this quiet. She looked out the window again, the city a patchwork of light and shadow. It was beautiful, in its way, even with all its flaws. She wondered if Whoopi missed it, the noise and the life of it. 2 years upstate wasn't forever, but it was long enough to feel the absence. Sarah hoped she had a window, at least. Something to look out of, to keep her tethered. The radiator clicked again, a soft reminder of the present. Sarah exhaled, long and slow, letting some of the tension slip away. She didn't have to solve it tonight. The trial, the sentence, the why of it all. It was enough to sit with it, to feel it. She closed her eyes again, the city humming beyond her walls, and let the night carry on without her.